4.7.
What?
Complete the square. Alright, so there were no notes for this section because there's about 3 lines of notes total. So I just do them. So the catchphrase I have for this is half the middle term and square it. So basically, if we have something like x squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0, and it's not factorable. Now, I say that some of the problems that the book may give you, it will say you need to solve this by completing the square, might actually be factorable. You cannot factor. You have to follow the instructions. Okay, I'm going to mark points off when I give you something that you have to complete the square on and you don't. Okay, so the way this would work is we would end up with x squared plus bx, and then we would move the c over to the other side because what we're trying to do is create a perfect square trinomial situation. So we add a box here, and we also add a box on this side because whatever we do to one side we have to do to the other. So the part that goes in the box, we half the middle term and square it. So half of b, so b over 2, squared. And a lot of times on this side, I will leave it like this because I'm using the 2 squared pieces to make my perfect square trinomial. Over here, a lot of times, I will go ahead and write whatever the number is. Now, it won't always end up being a fraction, obviously, but I'll end up going ahead and writing whatever the number is on that side, but for the sake of this, I'm just going to write the general form. It's up to you how you decide to write it on that side for whatever's easiest for you. So ultimately on this side, what I'm going for is ending up with an x plus or minus, again, depending on whatever the middle sign is, like we would normally do a perfect square trinomial, b over 2 squared, and then that's equal to whatever we have on this side. And then we would just solve it out to get what x equals. So, solve the equation by finding square roots. These ones don't say to complete the square, so we don't have to complete the square on these first ones. It'll be stuff that's factorable, and then we'll move into completing the square. So number 4, x squared plus 10x plus 25 equals 64. So basically, they have already, quote unquote, completed the square on these ones for you. Basically, they're trying to get you to do like the second half of the process. So, what does this side factor into? Factor. X plus 5 squared. It's perfect square trinomial. So it says again, this is basically, they have provided us with this step. We're trying to get and solve it all the way down. So that equals 64. Take the square root of both sides. So x plus 5 is equal to, square root of 64 is 8, so plus or minus 8. And then because we have stuff that we're actually trying to solve down, I am going to need to split it. So x plus 5 equals 8, or x plus 5 equals negative 8. Subtract the 5, so x equals 3, or x equals negative 13. And those would be the 2 solutions, basically, for that problem. Now, if this hadn't been a perfect square value, we would have just left whatever it was in the square root, because there's nothing else we can do with it. 8 x squared minus 18x plus 81 equals 5. So what does that left side factor into?
X plus 9 squared.
Nope. X minus 9 squared. So remember, it's whatever sign is on the middle term is what we put in here. Equals 5. Square root of both sides, so x minus 9 equals plus or minus the square root of 5. And if it ends up being something that's left in a square root, I'm okay with it if you just do x equals 9 plus or minus the square root of 5, or if you write it separate. Either way is completely fine with me. The book writes it as like all is one, so. All right. So the nice thing about this next part is they kind of like work us up to completing this square. So a lot of books just kind of like throw you in the deep end and are like, just complete the square. But this one gives you kind of like the process. So these problems say to find the value of C. Now C is our half the middle term squared. So basically what's going in the box that makes the expression a perfect square trinomial. Then write the expression as the square of a binomial. So basically they want to know what goes in this box and then what goes in the parentheses here. And that's all we're doing on these first problems. Okay, so that's how we're setting up a completing the square. So 14, we've got x squared plus 12x plus c. So remember, C is like my box, so if you need a visual. So I half the middle term, so half of 12 is 6, okay? So if I were to be writing this in general, I would write 6 squared on this side, but we know 6 squared is 36. So in this case, C is 36. So if I put in 36 here, what would you tell me the factoring of the perfect square trinomial would give me? Like what would be in the parentheses? X plus 6 squared. So aside from doing the right hand side, you just completed the square. And I will tell you, I don't find this topic to be difficult, but when I was in your shoes, I felt like I struggled with it. I felt like it didn't make sense. And a lot of times until like the second or third time that people actually go through and do these problems, and when I'm saying like second or third time, I mean like second or third year of doing them, they get confused about what to do. Okay, so if you're like, this isn't making sense, or maybe it makes sense right now, but then you go do the problems and you're like, I don't get it, that's normal. Just FYI. All right, 16. X squared minus 30x plus c. And so also when we half the middle term, because it's getting squared, we don't worry about the sign that's going on it. So like you don't need to be like, well, this would be negative whatever squared because the negative's going away. So half of 30 is, we square that, we get what? What'd you say? 225? Yep. So then what would be my factor? X minus 15 squared. All right, one more like that, and then we'll move into putting it all together as one process. So 18x squared plus 50x plus c. So what would c be in this case? Yeah, well, 25 squared, and then 525 or 625?
Yeah,
625. Okay. And then factor would be
x plus 25
x plus 25
squared.
squared. So now, if you combine what we just did with the first problems in this section, you have fully completed the square. So a lot of times people are like, they get these two parts, but then we put it together, and all of a sudden it's like, I don't know what happened. So we're going to take it nice and slow, putting it together, so we can make sure we understand. So 22, we've got x squared plus 4x. Now, they go ahead and tell you that it's in this one that it's equal to 10. You don't have to like move the number over. I like to go ahead and leave a space here to write my box because that way I don't have to rewrite the problem again. So equals 10. So when I complete the square, I know I've got to add the box so I can find my C value. What I do to one side, I've got to do to the other, so I've got to make sure I add a box on the other side as well. So what would be going in my box? What would my C value be?
4.
Okay, yep. So I'll show you, this is how I normally write it. I normally write 2 squared over here just for the sake of seeing what my factor is going to be. It just helps me, but then on this side I'll go ahead and write 4. That's totally up to you if you want it written as 4 on in both boxes, or you want it written as 2 squared in both boxes. Really doesn't matter. It's just the way I like to visualize it. So, perfect square trinomial on this side gives me what?
X plus 2.
Yep. Equals 14. Then we're back to the original problems. So take the square root of both sides. So x plus 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 14. If there's something you can take out of the square root, you should do that. But factors of 14 are only 2 and 7, and so obviously can't take anything out. And so then subtract this 2. So x equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 14. And you've successfully completed the square. Let's see. 26. X squared minus 18x plus 86 equals 0. So if they give it to you like this, you need to move this C value over, okay, because these problems say complete the square, so even if I can factor it, I'm still going to complete the square. Okay, follow the instructions. So, x squared minus 18x, and I go ahead and say plus box, so that I don't forget about it, equals negative 86 plus box. So, what's going in my box for this one?
81.
What? Yeah, I thought I heard somebody say 2.
It's 42.
That's not half of 86.
No, it's 43. I mean,
Half of 18 is 9. Square it. So, again, I like to write 9 squared. If you like to write 81, that's totally fine. But over here, I will write 81. And again, just purely my preference. You can do it however you want. So then on this side, this factors into what?
X minus.
Equals negative 5. Take the square root of both sides. So x minus 9 equals plus or minus the square root of negative 5. what do I notice there?
It's an imaginary number.
So what do I need to do?
Take out an I.
Take out an I. So to save us up writing, I'm going to move the 9 over and take out the I all at the same time. So x equals 9 plus or minus I root 5.
Oh boy.
Let's see. All right, I'm going to have you try 28 on your own. And then I'm going to do one more to show you something that you haven't seen yet. Wait a second. I lied. You can't do 28. We don't know how to do that yet. We're going to do 32, and then I'll let you try 28. All right. 32. 7t squared plus 28t plus 56 equals 0. So what I didn't mention, but maybe you noticed at the beginning up here when I was talking about completing the square, when I gave you the general form of it, what number is in front of x squared? So if there's not a 1 in front, I can't complete the square. Okay? But sometimes I can take something out of all the pieces so that I can get a 1 in front, and then I can proceed by completing the square. So what can I take out of this to give me a 1 in front? Okay, and obviously it has to be able to actually legitimately come out of everything, which in this case it can. So if I take out a 7, I'm left with t squared plus 4t plus 8 equals 0. So then I can divide by 7 on both sides. The 0 divided by 7, the 7 goes away. So I'm left with t squared plus 4t plus 8 equals 0. And then now I can move the 8 over and proceed with completing the square. So I would end up with t squared plus 4t plus box equals negative 8 plus box. So now what would go in my box? 2 squared, also known as 4. So my perfect square trinomial would be t plus 2 squared equals negative 4. So then take the square root of both sides. T plus 2 equals plus or minus. Now, this is the square root of negative 4, which would also be known as what? 2 what? I have 2i, because I have the negative in there. So I would take an I out, but then the square root of 4 is 2. So this is going to end up being, when I move this 2 on the left over, negative 2 plus or minus 2i. I don't know why I wrote that I so big. That was weird. All right. Now I'm going to go back and have you try 28. It's going to follow the same process of what we just did. I'll walk you through the first step, and then I'm going to have you go through it, the completing the square part yourself. So 2k squared plus 16k equals negative 12. So in this case, obviously everything's not on the left side, but when you take the number out on the left, you're going to just be dividing the right by whatever number you take out. Okay, because like technically up here, I divided 0 by 7. But that's still just 0. So whatever number you take out over here, you're going to divide negative 12 by that number, and then that number is gone. And then you'll be left with your 1 in front. Okay? So what number are you going to be taking out? 2. So I'll go through this part. So you have 2 taken out, so that's k squared plus 8k equals negative 12. And so then you would divide by the 2, so you'll have a negative 6 over here. And then your k squared stuff on this side. So go through and work that one. Make sure we're good, and then I'll give you the rest of the time to work. All right. Do you have an answer? Or anybody want to?
-3.
Just -3?
Yeah.
I got K equals -4 plus or minus -1I.
I got K equals -4 plus or minus square root of 10.
That's what I got. So when you divide it by 2, you should have ended up with k squared plus 8k, and then go ahead and you can do your plus box, equals -12 divided by 2 would be -6, and then plus box. And so then 4 squared, or 16 went in the box. So k plus 4 squared equals 10. Take the square root, so that's plus or minus square root of 10. And then -4 plus or minus the square root of 10. Now, usually when I'm asking you to complete the square, I'm going to give you one that already has a 1 in front. But if you can do those as hard as they are with having to take something out, you should be able to do all of them. So, problems are 5, 15, 19, 23, 25, and 29. 29 is going to require you to take something out like you did in 28 to be able to do that.